They fed us once in 9 days. Hungarian POW women cried when Americans brought real food. The convoy grinds to a halt as the last light of a February sun bleeds across the Austrian horizon. Canvas flaps are thrown back, revealing what remains of the Hungarian Auxiliary Corps. Women in mud-crusted uniforms, their faces grey as the winter sky, their bodies folded against each other for warmth they no longer possess. They are lifted down from the trucks like broken furniture. Across the frozen yard, a line of American soldiers stands waiting, rifles at rest, breath fogging in the cold. No one shouts, no one moves. The silence between captors and captured stretches, taut as wire. These are not fighters. They are the women who typed requisition forms, who wrapped bandages around wounds they could not heal, who relayed messages across radio frequencies for an army that has already abandoned them. For 9 days, they have marched westward across collapsing front lines, fed once, on the 3rd day, with soup so thin it was barely more than salted water. Their Hungarian officers fled days ago, but not before delivering the final cruelty. The Americans do not take women prisoner. They use them, then they dispose of them. Now, standing in the processing line of an American camp, Ilka Vásárhelyi forces her legs to hold. Her vision blurs. Her stomach has stopped hurting days ago, a sign, she knows, that her body has begun consuming itself. When the American sergeant reaches her, clipboard in hand, his question is routine. "When did you last eat?" She means to lie. She has been trained to lie. But her body is past pretense. The whisper escapes before she can stop it. Once, 9 days ago. The sergeant's pen stops moving. The clipboard lowers. For the first time since the trucks arrived, something in the American camp changes. The retreat began with whispers. Ilka first heard them in the medical supply tent outside Székesfehérvár, where she had spent 14 hours cataloguing bandages that would never reach the wounded. The Soviets have broken through at Budapest. The Americans are pushing from the west. We are caught between 2 fires. By morning, the whispers had become orders. Pack what you can carry, burn the rest, move. She was 23 years old, a medical clerk from Budapest with neat handwriting and a talent for organizing inventory lists. She had not chosen this war. The war had chosen her, a conscription notice arriving at her family's apartment 8 months earlier, singling her out for auxiliary service to the fatherland's allied forces. Her mother had wept. Her father had said nothing, which was worse. Within a week, Ilka was typing casualty reports in a field hospital, learning to spell the names of wounds she had never imagined: shrapnel fragmentation, suppurating gangrene, traumatic amputation. Now she stood in a frozen courtyard with 46 other women, nurses, radio operators, clerks, cooks, watching Hungarian officers pile documents into burning barrels. The flames threw wild shadows across the snow. No one told them where they were going. No one told them anything until Major Fekete gathered them in the abandoned schoolhouse that served as temporary headquarters. He was a small man with a thin mustache and the eyes of someone who had stopped sleeping weeks ago. Ilka had seen him before, barking orders from staff cars, never looking at the auxiliaries except to demand faster typing or cleaner floors. Now he looked at them, all of them, and something in his gaze made Ilka's stomach clench. "You know the situation," he said. His voice was flat, almost bored, as if he were reading a supply manifest. "The front has collapsed. We are moving west, toward the Austrian border. With luck, we will reach German lines before the Americans cut us off." Ilka exhaled. German lines, safety, or at least the familiar danger of continued war rather than the unknown terror of capture. "But you must understand something." Major Fekete paused. The fire crackled in the barrel outside. Someone coughed. "If the Americans take you, and they may, you will not be treated as prisoners of war." The silence in the schoolhouse became absolute. "The Americans do not recognize female auxiliaries as protected personnel," he continued. You are not soldiers. You have no rights under their interpretation of the Geneva Convention. You are material. Ilka felt Rosalia shift beside her. Rosie was 19, a radio operator from Debrecen who still kept a photograph of her younger brother in her breast pocket. Her hand found Ilka's in the dark and squeezed. "I will be direct with you because you deserve to know." Major Fekete's voice dropped, and somehow that was worse than shouting. "The American soldiers are not like us. They are not like the Germans. They come from a country without history, without culture, without restraint. Their army is filled with criminals and savages given uniforms and told to do as they please. They do not take women prisoner." He let the words hang. "They take trophies." Someone behind Ilka made a sound, a small, choked noise, quickly swallowed. "If you are captured, you will be used. All of you. Then you will be discarded. This is not propaganda. This is intelligence gathered from the Eastern Front, from nurses who escaped Soviet capture only to fall into American hands." His lip curled. "The Soviets at least send women to labor camps. The Americans do not bother with camps." Ilka's hands had begun to tremble. She was gripping a medical supply crate. She did not remember picking it up, and her knuckles were white against the olive-green wood. Her mind was doing something strange, something defensive. It was cataloguing the Major's words as if they were items on an inventory list. Used, discarded, trophies, neat columns of horror filed away for later processing. "Your best chance is to stay with the column," Major Fekete said. "Do not fall behind. Do not straggle. If you cannot keep pace, you will be left. We cannot afford to slow the retreat for anyone." His eyes swept across the room, and for a moment Ilka thought he was looking directly at her. "Carry nothing you do not need. We move in 1 hour." He turned and walked out. The cold rushed in through the open door, and then he was gone, leaving 47 women standing in the dark with the architecture of nightmares freshly constructed in their minds. Rosalia was the first to speak. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He's lying. He has to be lying." Why would he lie? Margit Szent-Györgyi, a radio operator older than most of them with steel-grey streaks in her hair, was already shouldering her pack. "What does he gain from scaring us?" "Control," Ilka heard herself say. The word surprised her. It had come from somewhere deeper than thought, from the part of her that had learned to read between the lines of casualty reports, to understand that the numbers on the page were never the whole truth. If we are terrified of capture, we will not surrender. We will keep marching no matter what. Margit looked at her. And if he's telling the truth? Ilka had no answer. They moved out before dawn, a straggling column of women trudging through snow that reached their calves. The Hungarian officers rode in vehicles that growled past them without stopping, their headlamps cutting weak yellow paths through the darkness. Ilka walked beside Rosalia, their shoulders bumping with each step, sharing warmth they could not afford to lose. The first woman collapsed on the second day. Her name was Teresia Nemes, a cook's assistant from Győr. She simply sat down in the snow and did not get up. The column kept moving. Ilka looked back once and saw Teresia's shape growing smaller, a dark smudge against the white, and then the road curved and she was gone. No one spoke of her. By the third day, Ilka had stopped feeling her feet. By the fifth, she had stopped feeling hunger. Her stomach had clenched into a fist and stayed that way, no longer sending signals her brain could interpret. On the third day, they were given soup, a thin, grey liquid ladled from a barrel that might once have held turnips. Ilka drank it so fast she burned her tongue. It was the last food she would see for 6 days. And through all of it, the cold, the hunger, the women dropping one by one like stones from a broken necklace, Major Fekete's words marched alongside her. "They do not take women prisoner. They take trophies." She did not know if it was true. She could not know. But the not knowing was its own kind of torture, a splinter lodged in her mind that she could not reach, could not remove, could only feel with every step. The Americans were coming. The Americans were monsters. The Americans would do things to her that she could not name, could not imagine, could only fear in the abstract, formless way that children fear the dark. And so, when the trucks finally came, not Hungarian trucks, not German trucks, but American trucks with white stars on their doors and soldiers who shouted in a language she did not understand, Ilka did not feel relief. She felt the splinter drive deeper. She believed. The march devoured them slowly. Day 1, they walked with purpose. Day 2, with effort. By day 3, they walked with nothing but the memory of walking, their legs moving through some animal instinct that had outlived conscious thought. The soup came on that third evening, ladled from a dented barrel into cups they held with shaking hands. It was grey, lukewarm, and tasted of roots and rust. Ilka drank it in 4 swallows. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Day 4, Borbala Kerekes sat down in the snow and did not rise. Day 5, 2 more. The column did not stop. The officers' vehicles growled past without slowing, leaving tracks that filled with fresh snow within the hour. By day 7, Ilka could no longer feel her feet. She watched them move beneath her, left, right, as if they belonged to someone else, some mechanical thing that had been attached to her body without her consent. Rosalia walked beside her, their arms linked, holding each other upright through some unspoken agreement that falling meant dying. On day 8, Margit Szent-Györgyi stumbled into a ditch. Ilka saw it happen, the older woman's ankle twisting, her body folding sideways, her hands reaching for something that was not there. Ilka's legs stopped. Her mouth opened to call for help, but Rosalia's grip tightened on her arm, pulling her forward, and the column kept moving, and Margit's voice, if she made any sound at all, was swallowed by the wind. By day 9, hunger had become a memory. In its place was something else, a hollow, buzzing emptiness where her stomach used to be. Her body had begun eating itself. She could feel it happening, cell by cell, the slow cannibalization of survival. Then the American trucks appeared on the horizon. The trucks stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than gunfire. Ilka stood in the frozen mud, swaying slightly, watching American soldiers pour out of vehicles marked with white stars. They moved with efficiency, shouting orders in a language that meant nothing to her, gesturing with rifles, forming the women into lines. No one resisted. Resistance required strength they no longer possessed. She was guided into a building, a warehouse perhaps, or a repurposed factory. Bare bulbs hung from wires overhead, casting yellow pools of light that did nothing to warm the air. Tables had been arranged in rows. Behind them sat American soldiers with clipboards and stamps and the bored expressions of men performing routine work. The processing line. Ilka took her place among the others, 41 women who had started as 47, arranged in silent rows like cattle awaiting inspection. Her vision tunneled. The edges of the room blurred and swam. She focused on the back of Rosalia's head, the matted hair, the mud-caked collar, and made that single point her entire world. Stay upright. Do not fall. Do not draw attention. The line moved forward in small shuffles. Each woman reached the table, answered questions she could not hear, received a stamp or a mark, and was directed elsewhere. Ilka watched the process repeat and repeat, her mind floating somewhere above her body, observing without comprehending. Major Fekete's voice whispered in her memory, "They take trophies." She studied the American faces for signs of cruelty, the thin smiles, the hungry eyes, the predatory patience she had been promised. She found nothing, only tired men doing paperwork. But that meant nothing. Monsters did not always announce themselves. The line shuffled forward. Rosalia reached the table, then moved on. Ilka stepped up. The sergeant looked at her. He was older than she expected, grey at the temples, lines around his eyes that suggested years rather than months of war. His clipboard was battered, his pen chewed at the cap. He looked at her the way one looks at a task to be completed, without malice, without interest, without anything at all. "Name," he said. Someone translated from behind him, the Hungarian words flat and mechanical. She gave it. "Unit!" She gave that too. He made marks on his clipboard. Routine, ordinary, the banality of bureaucracy even here, even now, at what she believed to be the end of her life. He asked more questions, her rank, her duties, her commanding officer. She answered in a voice that did not sound like her own, a distant thing that emerged from her throat without her participation. Then he asked the question that broke her. "When did you last eat?" She opened her mouth to lie. The lie was ready. Yesterday, this morning, a few hours ago. The lie was safe. The lie was what Major Fekete would have wanted. Show no weakness. Give them nothing. Do not let them see you are already dying. But her body had moved beyond lies. 9 days of starvation had stripped away everything non-essential. Pride, pretense, the careful architecture of self-protection. What remained was only truth, and it escaped before she could catch it. "Once," she whispered. 9 days. The sergeant's pen stopped. He looked up from his clipboard. For the first time, he saw her, not as a line item, not as a task, but as a human being standing in front of him, with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, and eyes that had forgotten how to hope. His expression shifted, the clipboard lowered. "Say that again," he said quietly. Ilka's legs began to buckle. She did not have to repeat herself. Her body spoke for her, knees folding, vision darkening, the floor rushing up to meet her. Hands caught her before she hit the ground. American hands, the enemy's hands. She waited for the roughness, the violence, the beginning of everything she had been promised. It did not come. The sergeant was on his feet. His clipboard clattered against the table. He was speaking rapidly now, not to her, but to the soldiers around him, his voice sharp with something that sounded almost like anger, but not at her, at something else, at someone else. "Get the cooks," he said. The translator did not bother converting the words. Ilka would learn their meaning later, would piece it together from context and memory, but she understood the tone. Urgency, command, purpose. A soldier sprinted toward the door. "All of them," the sergeant called after him. "I don't care if they're sleeping. Get them up now." The other guards exchanged glances. Something was happening that did not fit the script, did not match the orderly processing of prisoners that had been underway moments before. The sergeant moved down the line, looking at the other women, really looking, and Ilka saw his jaw tighten as he took in what he was seeing. The hollow faces, the skeletal wrists, the way they swayed on their feet like stalks of wheat in a dying field. "All of them," he said again, quieter now. "When did all of them last eat?" No one answered. No one needed to. Ilka was still on her knees, supported by hands she did not know, watching the sergeant's face as understanding settled into his features. He looked, in that moment, less like an enemy and more like a man confronting something he had not been prepared to find. The mess hall kitchen had been dark for hours. Private Danny Kowalski was the first cook through the door, still buttoning his shirt, cursing under his breath about sergeants who did not understand that breakfast was not served until 0600. Behind him came 2 others, Rivera and McGinnis, equally disheveled, equally irritated, equally unprepared for what they were about to see. "This better be good," Kowalski muttered, reaching for the light switch. If someone wants coffee at this hour, they can damn well make it them. The lights flickered on. Through the serving window, he saw them. 41 women arranged in the processing hall, visible through the open doors. Grey uniforms hanging from bodies that had no business being upright. Faces that belonged in hospitals or graves. Eyes that had stopped expecting anything good. Kowalski's hand froze on the switch. Jesus Christ. Rivera whispered. McGinnis said nothing. He was already moving toward the stoves, grabbing pots, filling them with water. His hands worked automatically, decades of kitchen instinct overriding the shock that had paralyzed the others. "Don't just stand there," he said. "Get the biscuits, the gravy, whatever meat we've got left from dinner. That's tomorrow's rations." "I don't care." McGinnis turned on the burners. Blue flames leaped to life. "Look at them! Look!" Kowalski looked. One of the women had collapsed against a guard who was holding her upright with visible uncertainty, as if he had never been trained for gentleness and was improvising as he went. "We're feeding them," McGinnis said. The words were not a suggestion. All of them. Right now. No one argued. Protocol could wait. Ration counts could wait. Paperwork and procedures and the proper channels for prisoner processing. All of it could wait. The pots began to boil. The doors opened and warmth hit her like a physical blow. Ilka had forgotten what warmth felt like. 9 days of frozen marches had convinced her body that cold was permanent, that ice had settled into her bones and would never leave. But now there was heat radiating from somewhere ahead and steam rising in soft clouds, and a smell that her starving mind could not immediately identify because it had been so long since she had encountered it. Food, real food, meat and bread and something rich and heavy that made her stomach clench with sudden, violent need. She was being guided forward. The hands that held her were firm but not cruel, directing her through the doorway and into a room that made no sense. Tables had been arranged in rows. Plates were being set down. American soldiers moved between the seats, carrying cups and utensils, their faces tight with something that looked almost like determination. "This is wrong," her mind whispered. "This is a trick. They are fattening us before the slaughter." But her body did not believe the warning. Her body lurched toward the nearest table with an animal desperation that overwhelmed every lesson Major Fekete had taught her. Around her, the other women were doing the same, stumbling forward, reaching for chairs, their eyes fixed on the plates with a hunger that went beyond physical need. Ilka was lowered into a seat. A plate appeared before her. Biscuits split open. Gravy pooling in the crevices. Chunks of meat arranged alongside. She stared at it. She could not move. Rosalia sat beside her, trembling, tears already streaming down her face. Neither of them reached for the food. To reach for it meant believing it was real, and believing felt more dangerous than starving. Then a voice said, "Eat, please." The first bite undid her. Ilka lifted a biscuit with fingers that shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The bread was warm against her palm, warm and soft and impossibly real. She brought it to her lips. Her teeth broke through the crust. Gravy flooded her mouth, rich and salty and so overwhelming that her vision blurred with tears before she had finished chewing. She had not given her body permission to cry. It simply happened, the same way breathing happened, the same way her heart continued to beat despite everything she had endured. The tears came, and she did not stop them. She could not stop them. 9 days of starvation, 9 days of terror, 9 days of believing she would die at the hands of monsters. All of it broke apart inside her chest and spilled down her cheeks and mixed with the gravy on her lips. Around her, the other women wept too. No one spoke. The mess hall filled with the sounds of chewing and swallowing and quiet, desperate sobbing. Forks scraped against plates. Cups were lifted and drained and refilled by American hands that moved between the tables without comment. Rosalia ate with her eyes closed, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. Somewhere behind them, a woman was making small, wounded sounds. Not words, just noise, the vocalization of relief too large for language. The soldiers watched from the edges of the room. Ilka saw them standing there, these men she had been taught to fear, and she saw something she did not expect. Some of them had turned away. One, private, young, barely older than she was, stood with his back to the tables, his shoulders rigid, his hand pressed against his mouth. Another wiped his eyes with his sleeve and pretended he had not. The monsters were crying too. Night fell, and the barracks glowed with warmth. Ilka lay on a cot beneath a wool blanket, American issue, rough against her skin, the most beautiful thing she had ever touched. An iron stove crackled in the corner, radiating heat that reached her even from across the room. Her stomach was full. Her body was still. For the first time in 9 days, she was not moving, not marching, not fighting to stay upright. A medic had checked her earlier. He had clucked at her condition, shaken his head at numbers on a chart she could not read, given her water and small white pills he called vitamins. His hands had been gentle. His voice had been kind. He had not looked at her the way Major Fekete said he would. None of them had. Rosalia slept beside her, breathing slow and deep, her face peaceful in a way Ilka had not seen since before the retreat began. Around them, 40 other women rested in rows of cots, wrapped in blankets, alive in ways they had not expected to be. The officers had lied. The monsters were not monsters. The enemy had fed them, clothed them, wept for them. The Americans had looked at 41 starving women and seen not trophies, not material, but human beings worth saving. She thought of the sergeant lowering his clipboard. She thought of the cook who said, "We're feeding them, all of them, right now." She closed her eyes. The war was not over, but something inside her had ended, and something else, fragile, uncertain, necessary, had begun. Mercy, she learned that night, does not always come from those who promise it. Sometimes it comes from the last place you expect. If this story moved you, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. History remembers the battles. Let us remember the mercy too.